What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Pokemon breeding is a core mechanic in the franchise, letting you get better Pokemon for battle or even shinies. This is done by putting two Pokemon in the daycare and letting them create an egg. But it can't just be any old Pokemon that you throw together. For Pokemon to successfully breed, they have to share the same egg groups, which makes sense. What doesn't always make sense is in which egg groups these Pokemon are actually categorized. In theory, these classifications are to make it easier to identify which Poke pairs might match up, but for some of these Pokemon, they just don't belong. Starting with the Field group, this is the largest category out there, so it's no surprise that it would hold an enigma or two. After all, this is the egg group that brings us the infamous pairing of Wailord and Skitty. But to me, what makes even less sense is to just imagine a Wailord out in a field. It's not exactly going to be able to do much of anything. But even more than that, in a similar vein, are the Dugong and Walrein lines. Not only are these sea lion-esque Pokemon gonna have a tough time getting around in an open field, but these are ice types, meaning that they're completely out of their element, and would probably die getting baked in the hot sun, unable to escape the huge seas of grass. Now take a look at the Monster Egg Group. It's a fairly generic term. After all, they are all pocket monsters, but they're not all in this group. So I can only imagine that their intention is to describe beastly and potentially aggressive suitors that are essentially dinosaurs. And for the most part, you can look through the list and think, yeah, I can see that. Even Lickitung works, since its evolution is such a monstrosity. But when I came across Mareep in the Monster Egg Group, I was quite perplexed. Mareep is one of the cutest little Pokemon around, and even though its evolutions can be very useful for a good electric type, they're not particularly on the same level as other Pokemon that you would call monsters. Furthermore, sheep, in real life, are among the most docile and helpless creatures in existence, meaning that they really couldn't even harm a fly. So lumping in these adorable and relatively harmless Pokemon with huge scaly behemoths doesn't exactly flow for me. Next, I'll direct your attention to the Water Egg Group. Groups, actually. There's 3 of them. The Group Water 1 doesn't really have anything too crazy that you might not expect. There is the occasional Stunfisk or Dratini, but those Pokemon live in the water anyway. No, I'd like to talk about the Water 2 group for a minute, and namely how Inkay and Malamar are a part of it. Big deal, you might be saying. They're squids, it makes sense. In theory, perhaps, but looking over this egg group, it doesn't take you long to see a pattern developing that this group is clearly meant for fish-like Pokemon. Even Pokemon that are more diverse in their final stage started as fish. Except again for our pal Wailord, who is an aquatic mammal. So forgetting the fact that these two aren't even water types, they don't fit with the other fish-based Pokemon that this group is clearly meant for. They should have gone in the Water 3 group with Tentacool, but that egg group presents its own set of problems. See, Water 3 is sort of like a catch-all cleanup for any water types that didn't fit in the first 2. I could point out things like this being Crabrawler's only egg group even though it's not water, but that's probably alright. Same for the Hoenn fossils, since they are commonly described as having lived in the seas back in the day. In fact, you can find a lot of fossils here. Some would say too many. For some reason, Archeops decided it needed to sneak its way into the Water 3 egg group. Buddy? I know you wanted to be with your friend Caracosta, but you do not belong here. Water is your mortal enemy, and that's really not going to go over well with your defeatist ability. It's not like all of the fossils are required to be in this group. The Sinnoh ones weren't. But as much as I could maybe see the fossil connections making some sort of sense, why in the world is Drapion in the Water 3 group? It's not even close to a water type, or even an aquatic type animal. The only other egg group that it's in is the Bug group, but at least that one works since its pre-evolution is a bug type. But for the most part, the bug group on the whole is mostly what you'd expect. You do have the Flygon line, but I mean, just look at them. What isn't as clear-cut to me is Gliscor. I know that Gliscor and Gligar are flying scorpion things, but calling them bugs doesn't really seem appropriate. I wouldn't even mind so much, except this is the only group that Gliscor can breed with. Not even the monster or flying groups. But speaking of the flying group, they actually did a pretty good job with this one. They don't even have any Pokemon that aren't flying types except for Decidueye, who starts life as a flying type anyway. So, keep up the good work, I guess, flying types. Next is the Dragon Egg group, which sort of bends the description a bit by including just general reptile creatures. I find it funny that most snake Pokemon have such a high opinion of themselves that they feel on the same level as dragons. But one that took me by surprise was Scrafty. Maybe it shouldn't, since it can learn so many dragon-type moves, but honestly, I'd have expected it to be more in the human-like egg group. If Lucario's in there, Scrafty, who looks far more human-like, certainly could be, but more on that group later. If Scrafty and other snakes can be dragons, then the Unova Snake Starter Superior definitely should be considered one, at least by this egg group, instead of being relegated to field and grass. But while we're on the grass egg group, it's pretty straightforward. They are all grass types, that is, until you get all the way down to the bottom and see that Comfey is in this egg group as well. Just when we were starting to get over the fact that Comfey wasn't a grass type, they went and made this the only possible egg group that it could be in. People always say, but the flowers aren't actually part of its body. Well, apparently it's close enough to successfully breed with most any other plant-based Pokemon. At least the Florges family had the decency to be in the fairy egg group only, so as not to confuse people even further. And the fairy egg group is a little strange. It does predictably have many Pokemon that actually turned into the fairy type, but it also has some others. For instance, the Snorunt family is in the fairy egg group. I suppose I could see that for the little guy, and it actually works pretty well for the late Dawnstone evolution Frostlass. But you're telling me that Glalie is fairy-like? Now, I really like this ice type, but he's just a giant, angry, spiky face. You have all these cutesy little Pokemon, and then you come to this ferocious glare? I can't see it. And the same holds true for Shroomish. This little fungus with a squashed face was put in this fairy egg group because I couldn't even begin to guess. Some people might say that it's so ugly it's cute, but that still means that it's ugly. And just doesn't belong with all of these other adorable, wholesome Pokemon here. And it doesn't really help out anymore when it evolves into the fighting-type Breloom. But one other strange instance in the fairy egg group, to me anyway, is actually an omission. You see, Pikachu is in the fairy egg group, as are the rest of the Pikachu clones. All that is, except for Emolga. For whatever reason, the flying squirrel from Unova doesn't share enough in common with the rest of its brethren to be in the fairy and field egg groups. It can't be that it has too much of an edge or anything, because, again, I give you Glalie and Breloom. Or maybe it's just to balance out the fact that Plusle and Minun are only in the fairy group and not in the field as well. Who's to say? We mentioned earlier about the human-like egg group, which is fairly self-explanatory. It's Pokemon that are basically too far removed from animals to be anything else, aka one of my least favorite kinds of Pokemon. But one in this group that I find to be funny is Elgyem and Beheeyem. Now they certainly are humanoid enough, that's not the problem. These Pokemon are pretty famously considered to be extraterrestrials, meaning they're aliens, as in, not humans. So describing them as human-like just strikes me as a funny, bizarre contrast. There's also the mineral egg group, which is full of lots of rock, ground, or steel types, which makes sense. But there are also certain human-influenced Pokemon, whether they were created intentionally or by accident. One that I don't quite get is Porygon. Mostly just because the Dex entries describe Porygon as being made of pure data, or at least being able to transfer its body into pure computer code and speed through cyberspace. I guess it's just because of the man-made aspect that they didn't know where else to put these computerized Pokémon. And I suppose they are technically made of some kind of material to be solid, so it could have been minerals that they used in their 3D printer. But the mineral egg group also has Yamask and Coffagrigus. Now this one doesn't really jive with me either, since these Pokémon are pure ghost types. Most other ghosts are in the amorphous egg group, but since Coffagrigus is itself inhabiting a confined space, I suppose that explains that one. But Yamask is merely holding the mask. It's not a part of its anatomy. Otherwise they should have been ghost and ground types or something. I thought the same thing about Poltegeist when they first showed it, wondering what other type the teapot would give it before seeing that it was also pure typed. So don't be surprised if Poltegeist ends up in the mineral egg group just for possessing a man-made object. But of course, the most obvious erroneous inclusion in any egg group has to be Nidorina and Nidoqueen, being in the undiscovered egg group. This mysterious characterization means that Pokémon in this group cannot breed, and it's usually reserved for the likes of legendaries or baby Pokémon, but for some reason contains these two perfectly ordinary Pokémon as well. It stems from some sort of fault in the programming where the game couldn't recognize different evolutions from what were supposedly the same Pokémon but had different dex numbers between them? Something like that. All I know is that it's been 20 years. I think we've reached the point technologically that we can probably solve this problem by now. So hopefully Nidorina and Nidoqueen won't be stuck in this category forever. Which Pokémon and egg group combinations do you think are off? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And we'll see you around next time!